All right. So this study is a 2011 study. It's a little bit old, but this study deals with Tourette's and associated disorders like tic disorders and excitatory substances. Is there a connection? So today we are going to talk about, is there a connection? We're going to talk about what the study says, what the study's missing, what are excitatory substances, and what does this connection mean for you? So these are the things that we are going to talk about today. So in this particular study, they took 44 Tics Tourette's patients, 44 kids, and then they took 44 normal children and investigated their daily eating habits. So what we know is that they made sure that these 44 patients were not taking any kind of drugs or substances, medications, 2 weeks before the study. So we're going to talk about how this study is kind of a mix of things. So you have to understand, I want you to understand that there are more than 10,000 food additives allowed in our food in the United States of America. Some countries have much stricter rules and they're not allowing all of these additives. But in the United States, there are 10,000 different additives that can be added to our food. So anything that is packaged, processed, anything like that, we're going to add some garbage to your food. Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. And the FDA approves this. We're going to talk about the FDA-approved way to get brain damage. So these chemicals are added to foods for a variety of reasons: for color, shine, texture, artificial flavors, to extend the shelf life. And to be honest, many of these chemicals are never reviewed for safety, or it's been years since they've been reviewed and decades since they were re-reviewed. So we have to look at what is really currently in our food supply. So keep in mind, there are over 10,000 food additives allowed in US food production. Doesn't that sound yummy? Who thinks that sounds yummy? Yes, everybody? Yes, that sounds so good. So good. So what are some food additives? We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the study. We're going to go through here. So some of those food additives can be things like, I can't think, parabens. So I love this example is you go to Walmart and you get the generic corn tortillas. There are 3 different varieties of parabens in there. Parabens cause metabolic dysfunction. They can lead to cancer. So parabens are used to extend the shelf life. So those are just one example. You've got excitatory colors. You've got excitatory flavors. We're going to talk about the top 5 most excitatory and what they do to the brain. So we're going to talk about all of those. But I want you to understand, we're looking at all of these things that are in our food. And on top of the additives, on top of the approved additives of garbage, there's things like pesticides and herbicides that are in our food sources. We have many particles of plastic. You drink out of a plastic water bottle, you're gonna get some many plastic particles. There's things like Roundup, so glyphosate, all sorts of good, yummy things in our food supply. So over 10,000 different additives, plus all of the chemical toxins. You know, things like apples and rice higher in things like arsenic. So there are chemicals and toxins and additives lurking everywhere. So let's talk about this study a little bit. So this study looked at 44 normal and 44 patients that were diagnosed with a tic disorder. Here's what we looked at with this study. So they spent, hold on, I lost my place. Okay, they spent 2 weeks eating food and drink. So puffed food, one of the things that they ate, ramen noodles. Ramen noodles. One of the things about ramen noodles is that we are putting in a whole ton of glutamine. Those little teeny ramen noodle packages, those flavoring packages, you dump that on your ramen noodles and you have, it's very excitatory. You want more. Those ramen noodles are so good because of the glutamate, MSG, that is added to the little flavor package. So this is what they ate for 2 weeks. This sounds horrible to me. The other problem with this is that they don't address the fact in this study that yes, they ate ramen noodles for 2 weeks with the little package, but also the ramen noodles are full of wheat and gluten. So there's that as well. So that part is not considered. So when we're looking at this study, we have to be like, well, what's missing? Okay, well, they ate ramen noodles with a little package, but you know what else was missing? That we don't talk about the fact that there's wheat and gluten in there, okay? The other thing that they're not talking about, they drank 350 milliliters of cola a day. So they gave them two variables here. You got the excitatory, plus you got the cola. So you got the sugar and the caffeine and the caramel color, which is an additive added to soda to make it caramel colored. And it's very toxic. It's known as a carcinogen. So you have the caramel color. So when we're looking at this study, we don't just have the variable of, okay, they're eating a lot of MSG, a lot of glutamate, but they're also eating wheat, gluten, sugar, caffeine, caramel color. They're also getting all of these other factors. So when we look at this study, they're going to say at the end, oh yeah, that we're seeing a huge increase in kids with tics and Tourette's when they're eating these high glutamine excitatory foods, but they're not taking into account the other pieces of the things that these kids are eating in this process, right? Does that make sense? And so when we look at this, the conclusion is that they saw an increase in symptoms. And they are saying in here, unhealthy food possibly causes TS and tics, unhealthy food. So in here, their unhealthy food was ramen noodles and soda. I don't know how many of you went to college, but that was probably your standard diet like it was for me, is ramen noodles and soda and beer and all the other things. Very unhealthy diet. So yes, they're saying there's a relationship here, but it's not just based on the excitatory chemicals. So the headline for this is really kind of misleading because we're thinking, okay, we're going to find out about excitatory chemicals. And then in the conclusion, we're like, we're talking about unhealthy food. But we also want to know, like, on that range, that spectrum, what is considered an unhealthy food? Are we talking about all packaged processed foods? Or are we talking about foods with just excitatory chemicals? Are we talking about sodas? This is just kind of lumping it all in there. So they're not really focusing on the excitatory chemical piece, even though the headline leads you to believe that. They're really focusing on, you know what? We're seeing an increase in symptoms when these kids eat this crap, right? So yes, there is a connection. And then I'm going to tell you what I see clinically from the perspective of the clients that I have been working with. Genetically, many people are predisposed to not being able to tolerate some of these excitatory substances. So let's talk about what those top 5 excitatory substances are. Okay, so number 1, of course, being MSG. It's the little package that's found in your ramen noodles. It's in all sorts of other stuff. Here's what you have to know about MSG. MSG is in about 95% of our processed food. And you're thinking, but it doesn't say MSG. It doesn't say MSG on there, monosodium glutamate. So you have glutamine and you have MSG. Glutamine is an amino acid. It is bound to a protein. So we're not having the same impact on the brain as we are when we're having MSG, which is free glutamine that is not bound to a protein. Okay? So here's what you have to know. FDA says you can have MSG in anything as long as it's less than 99% pure, and you can call it whatever the hell you want. When you start to look at the list of things that are like glutamates and they mimic MSG, it is a long, long, long list. Because they can call it hydrolyzed yeast protein, hydrolyzed wheat protein, that's whey protein can be excitatory. There's all sorts of things that really fit into this. So we call these excitotoxins. This is the FDA-approved way to excite your brain. So what happens? So many of the kids, I'm going to say 95% of the kids I work with, have a predisposition to not being able to tolerate glutamate in the brain. So glutamate is excitatory. We need it in the brain. Glutamine is excitatory. It's part of our brain. We need it in the brain. What happens is we end up with an imbalance of GABA to glutamate. We have way high levels of glutamate and not enough GABA to balance that out. Your body takes that glutamine and turns it into GABA. Some people don't do this conversion. 95% of my clients, I don't do this conversion very well. And so what happens is we end up with these high levels of glutamate in the brain, and we already have a lot of inflammation. So it turns on our microglial cells. These are the immune cells in the brain. This is your specialized immune cells. When that happens, we have a glutamate storm. We release more. And when we release more, we end up releasing calcium, damaging the neurons in our brain. So MSG, in any form, 99% pure or not, is really very toxic to the brain. It's what we call an excitatory chemical. You're finding that in your package. It's found in a lot of Chinese foods. It's found in pretty much anything processed. If you go and you read your label of Doritos, you're gonna find some form of MSG in there, which is, then we're looking back at that study, unhealthy food. Doritos is not a healthy food, okay? So we're gonna talk about MSG. It's essential for brain health, but too much of it causes neurological problems. So you've got MSG, that's one. Next is aspartame. So when we're looking at like sugar-free stuff, aspartame is in tons of things. You're gonna find it in diet sodas. You are gonna find it in any kind of like diet products that are supposed to be sugar-free. Aspartame. It is an excitatory chemical. It is toxic to the brain. It is one of the most popular and widely consumed food additives in our food source. And really, when we look at aspartame, you know, when it was first designed, late 60s, 70s, it was used as ant killer. So then we decided, ooh, this shit's sweet. We're gonna put it in soda. Have some ant killer. It's really good for your brain. So aspartame is really excitatory, toxic to the brain. The FDA is like, no, it's not. They have spent so many years saying that it's not. There's all of these studies now saying, you know what, aspartame's not good for you. Not only that, but it alters your gut microbiome. So not only does it impact your brain, but it alters your gut microbiome. Next, so that's the top two, MSG and aspartame. Next, we're going to talk about phenylalanine, which is also used in combination with aspartame. You find it again in a ton of diet sodas. I think it's most widely found in Pepsi. You can find it in like all of these sugar-free, quote unquote, sugar-free yogurts. You are getting all of these excitatory chemicals. Okay, so phenylalanine is found in protein-rich foods like milk, eggs, and meat. But when it's sold separately, when it's pulled out of the protein is really an important piece. You want these chemicals in your food. Like meat is rich in glutamine, but it's bound to a protein. So it's not gonna affect your brain the way that these free floating things affect your brain. So when we talk about phenylalanine, definitely affects people who have PKU. So if you know your child is born and they test PKU, this is one of those things that we're looking for. But it really is toxic to the brain. Large amounts of phenylalanine and aspartame are also contained in some medications. So things like monoamine oxidase inhibitors, neuroleptics, and medications like levodopa all have things like phenylalanine in it. So you have Parkinson's already. You already got Parkinson's. And then you put in some phenylalanine, that might increase your symptoms by taking things like levodopa. So we have to look at those chemical components that are in our food. Next is cysteine. Cysteine is an amino acid. When it's bound to a protein, when it's part of protein, we're good. When it's a food additive, it's used to extend the shelf life of bread and food products. Also used very highly as a food coloring agent. We have a lot of cysteine in our hair. It's found in poultry feathers. But again, high levels of cysteine, when it's added to foods as an additive, can cause neurological symptoms, including things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And then finally, here's the big guy. So many parents are like, oh my gosh, we need to give our kid milk so that they have strong bones. One, that's false advertising. We've been false advertised too. Two, it's full of casein. So what is casein? It is a protein compound found in cheese naturally at high levels, but also used as a food additive. We're putting caseinate in things. It is very excitatory to the brain, and really what happens is it causes more of a morphine opioid effect in the brain. It binds to your opioid receptors. This is why we love things like macaroni and cheese, because dairy, people with a cheese addiction, I'm not kidding, binds to those opioid receptors, and it makes them feel so good that they're like, oh man, I need some more of that cheese. I need some more of that macaroni and cheese. I need some more of whatever that is, because of the way that it binds to the brain. But you also have to know that you can find it in a lot of health conscious bars, like protein bars, yogurt, infant formula. They add it to crap like margarine, bread, whipped toppings. So you need to look at those ingredients. Margarine, I don't recommend anybody eat margarine. It's garbage margarine. So when we look at this, you have to understand there's 10,000 different food additives. Many of them are top 5 being excitatory to the brain, meaning they are going to cross the blood-brain barrier, they are going to excite the brain, turn on your immune system, and cause all sorts of issues. And the more that you consume them, like those people that are like, I'm gonna have a Diet Pepsi every single day for my entire life, are now 60 years old and experiencing things like Parkinson's. You have to understand what is in your food sources, okay? You have to look at that, because what happens is you are impacting your genetics. So you're eating things with tons of additives and garbage. You're impacting your genetics, you're impacting the way that your genes work, you're impacting your gut, and you're impacting your brain. So when we look at these quote unquote unhealthy foods from the study, yeah, you're having soda. It doesn't specify in here if it was diet soda, so we don't know that. If it was diet soda, that's going to be even more impactful, because yes, they're using an excitatory chemical. They just called it cola. So we don't know that in this study. But what we do know is that there is a connection from excitatory chemicals, but you will see, like, especially if anybody has, followed the Reed diet, she really talks about glutamates and glutamine. We want to know genetics when it comes to that. We want to be able to look at your genes and be able to look at that genetics for that glutamate. So the FDA says, hey, we can put all this shit in our food. Excuse my language, but that's what happens. They can put it all in our food, and then we eat it, and then it impacts our brain. And no one ever tells us, hey, these foods you're eating are impacting your brain. They're impacting your gut. They're impacting your immune system, right? So yes, there is a connection of excitatory chemicals. Are excitatory chemicals in your food the only thing that might be causing your child's tic disorders? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say we have to look at all of these compound factors: diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation, all of these things that they're doing. One of the things that I really want to talk about that's not an excitatory chemical, but I want you to be aware of is, I say on here all the time, I'm not going to talk about medications. And I've talked a little bit about it, but today I'm going to talk about medications. This particular medication starts with abila and ends in a word that rhymes with fly, okay? And this particular medication is used for things like anxiety and depression. Doctors more and more are using it for tic disorders. Educate yourself. If you want to use a medication, please educate yourself, pros and cons. This particular medication, you know what one of the side effects is? Uncontrollable body movements of the eyes, lips, tongue, arms, and legs. What does that sound like to you? So you start taking this medication for whatever, anxiety, which you can do a lot with food. You start taking this medication, and then it increases tics. You start taking more, and then you go back to the doctor, and they're like, "Ooh, let's up that. Let's see if we can help that." So then you start taking more, and a couple of weeks later, things are worse. And then you go back to the doctor, and they're like, "Oh, let's up it some more." You start taking more, a couple of weeks later, it's worse. So you need to really be educated about your ingredients, period. Like, looking at your labels, I'm gonna say eat a whole foods diet: meats, fruits, vegetables, wild caught fish, poultry. Get rid of the packaged processed crap. We really don't need to be eating it. 200 years ago, we weren't eating the packaged processed crap, and now that's all that's on our shelves, and that so many parents are focusing on it because it's easy. It's easy to make rice-a-roni and tuna helper. It's easy. We can come home from work and we can throw something on the stove and we're done. We don't have to think about it. It's easy. But is easy gonna cut it when it comes to your kids' gut and brain health? Is easy gonna cut it when they are experiencing issues throughout their life? We have to think about the ingredients that are everywhere. 10,000 FDA-approved chemicals and additives in our foods. To me, that's a huge, staggering number. And to me, there's not enough data and not enough information. And we're just blindly like, we're going to eat our Takis. They're so good, even though they give us diarrhea. Like, we really need to look at what are those chemicals in our food? What are we exposing our children to? One of the things that drove me absolutely nuts when my kids were in elementary school was that everybody where we live gets free breakfast. They get free lunch too, but they got free breakfast. And so my kids would go to school and they would eat packaged waffles. So they take these packages of waffles, plastic packages, pop those bad boys in the microwave. So we're microwaving plastic. We have these waffles that are full of gluten, sugar, and chemical additives. So this is what we're having. pop them in the microwave, give them to our kids with a thing of juice, which is full of freaking sugar and artificial colors, so they get their quote unquote juice. Then they get a carton of milk that has casein in it, right? And they might get like an orange or something with it, but that's what they would eat for breakfast. And they would just roll the carts through and they serve off all this food to these kids. And then they wonder why these kids cannot sit and focus in school. They don't focus. They need drugs. They can't focus. No, it's because you fed them crap for breakfast. You need protein to make neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are going to help you focus, function, and feel good. You need protein in the morning. Protein. You need protein all the time, especially if you're working on healing your child. Your kid needs upwards of 1 to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, depending on their age. So I want you to keep that in mind. Like what you eat matters. And we talk about this all the time. Diet is one piece of the puzzle for my clients. It is not the whole piece of the puzzle, but many of my parents will tell you it is a big piece of the puzzle. It is a big piece of the puzzle. But we also have to look at underlying infections. We have to look at gut issues like leaky gut, dysbiosis. We have to look at environmental toxins and heavy metals and all the other things that go with it. So we're going to look at all of this. So